Good evening. Due to the COVID-19 emergency, tonight's Committee of Adjustment hearing is being held via video conference and live stream video at the town's live stream page at oakville.ca. This is a hearing to consider applications for minor variance and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act. Please keep in mind the intent of this process is to review the application that is before the committee, listen to the evidence, and then make a decision. This process is not intended to be used to resolve any concerns or disputes that may exist between the town, individuals, or organizations. If a request for a deferral is made and the committee grants such a request, the applicant and authorized agent must contact the Secretary Treasurer to schedule a new hearing date. In order for us to conduct an effective and efficient hearing, we have adopted the following process. If you are watching the live stream of this hearing on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to an item on the agenda, you can call 905-815-6095. Again, that is 905-815-6095. And the phone number will be posted on your screen below the live stream page at oakville.ca. Staff will be standing by to take your call. You will be asked for your name and number and the item which you would like to address. Further instructions will be provided for you to call back to join the video conference, and when the chair of the committee polls for interested parties, the Secretary Treasurer will unmute you and allow you the time to speak. The applicant or agent will be given the opportunity to briefly explain to the committee the basis of the application and answer any questions that may arise. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided for a presentation. You will need to state your full name and address for the record, and any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. All delegations must also state their full name and address for the record. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided to make the presentation. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chair, and any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. The applicant or agent will then be provided with a further 5 minutes to respond to the comments made by interested parties and answer any questions from the committee members. If the applicant or agent has any concerns found in staff report, particularly with the proposed conditions, this will be the opportunity to advise us. The matter will then be taken into committee for a decision, and this will mark the end of all discussion. Any person desiring a notice of a decision for an application must provide a written request, preferably through email, to the Secretary Treasurer. Please note that you must make a written request in order to be included on the list that is used by the Ontario Land Tribunal for the giving of any subsequent notice of appeal. Written consent of the committee's decision will be mailed no later than 10 days for minor variance and 15 for consent applications to the applicant, agent, or any person who filed a written request for such notice. If you do not agree with the committee's decision, you may appeal this to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and the last day to do so will be noted on the decision. If no appeal is received within the prescribed timeframe, the decision of the committee becomes final and binding, and the Secretary Treasurer will then notify the applicant and anyone who has received a copy of the decision through written correspondence. People participating in the hearing are to be courteous to and respectful of the members of the committee, town staff, and any other member of the public participating in the electronic hearing. Tonight's electronic hearing is being video recorded and available for future viewing at oakville.ca. Thank you. We have no regrets this evening, and I have any declarations of pecuniary interest. Mr. Talowski, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to declare a conflict on CAV A120. The applicant and my company have a business relationship.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Talowski. Are there any other pecuniary interests? Mr. Flemington, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I will also be declaring a conflict on CAV A120.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Flemington. Any others? Okay, I see none. Madam Secretary Treasurer, I'll be taking deferrals and requests for deferrals or withdrawals of applications at this time. If there's anyone in the audience who seeks to defer their application, please raise your hand and the Secretary Treasurer will invite you to speak at this time.
Okay, I've moved Mr. Hicks into the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Re-application CAV 118 for 1276 Cambridge Crescent. Seeking a deferral, we had a we had an item come up, which we don't agree with, but apparently they consider the lot a through lot from Cambridge to Lakeshore, even though there's a 1 foot reserve that doesn't create it as a through lot. But to be totally safe, we're going to come back with a new application that has to include height as a variance, because the lot drops into a river at the back. So we got a very low elevation at the back of the lot. But so we just became aware of that yesterday, unfortunately. So we will be back. There won't be any changes in the drawings, but there will be a variance sought for height because of the grade has to be measured from both the front lot line and the lot line on Lakeshore. So.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Hicks. Is there any questions or items of clarification? Okay, I see none. All those in support of a deferral? Okay, your application has been deferred, none opposed. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. You'll see the Secretary Treasurer for the next available date.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else, Ms. Secretary Treasurer?
I believe, oh yeah, here we go, just one moment. Okay, I've moved Mr. Rabot into the panelist.
Very well. Good evening, Mr. Rabeau.
Good evening, committee. My name is Matthew Rebo, Perspective Views, representing the owners Kevin and Anna King at 1269 Lamprey Crescent. Sorry, I just came out of a heritage meeting at a Hamilton, and I'm just catching up, so I don't know if anything else was said in this application. However, we are agreeing to a deferral due to an additional variance being required.
Very well, yes, that was in our report. We thank you for that clarification. Are there any questions? Oh, Mr. Rabeau. Okay, all those in support of a deferral? Okay, thank you. Your application has been deferred, none opposed. You'll see the Secretary Treasurer when you're able to for the next available date.
Thank you, committee. Have a good evening.
Good evening. Okay. We'll move on to the first item of our agenda. If there are no further requests for deferrals or withdrawals.
I see no further requests.
Very well. So the next item on our agenda is CAV 113 of 2022 at 216 Forest Wood Drive. Again, it's CAV 113 of 2022 at 216 Forest Wood Drive. If you're interested in this application or you're in attendance and would like to speak to this application, please raise your hand. And the number to call is 905-815-6095. Staff will be standing by to take your call and provide you with further instructions to attend the video conference. Okay, good evening, Mr. Demchek.
Good evening, members of the committee. Sorry, just technical difficulties on my end. Thank you. Yes, my name is Paul Demchek with Victoria Planning and Management, and I'm the planning consultant on behalf of the applicant for 216 Forestwood Drive in Oakville. I do have a brief presentation, obviously prepared this evening. If I could just direct the committee to the next slide, please. Sure. So just as a brief background, so obviously the subject site is located in a mature residential subdivision in the southeast area of Oakville, east of Chartwell Road and north of Lakeshore Road East. The subject site measures approximately 1,448 square meters and is generally rectangular in shape, and an existing one-story detached dwelling is currently located on the subject property. Next slide, please. So before the committee this evening, there are a total of 4 variances being requested to facilitate the proposed development, being a increase in maximum height for the main dwelling, increase in the ancillary building height, and then as well as increases in the maximum lot coverage and residential floor area. Next slide, please. I will spend a moment just for the benefit of the committee and the public, just going through each of the proposed variances, but I would like to perhaps just take a minute to describe the proposed development and what is obviously before the committee this evening. So the proposed development includes a 2-story single detached dwelling with an overall floor area of approximately 455 square meters. The building has generally been cited to locate and fit appropriately on the subject site relative to the setbacks on the property and relative to the siting of adjacent dwellings. So for example, the dwelling meets or exceeds all required building setbacks, including a front yard setback that reflects that of adjacent properties. It has also importantly been cited to mitigate impacts on the numerous existing tree canopy located on the site. This includes the driveway location and the siting of the dwelling to mitigate all of the 5 trees that are located in the frontage of the property, as well as trees that are located and border trees that are located at the rear of the property, as well as the north and south side being the side yards of the subject property. I will spend a moment in the presentation on the slides further getting into the details of the building elevations, but I will note that the architecture of the home has been carefully designed and considered in terms of its materials, roof line, and building proportions to ensure compatibility with adjacent properties in the immediate neighborhood context. What you'll also note in a moment is that there's a number of there's a number of features on the dwelling, single-story elements, including, for example, a portico and entrance features on the facade that break up the building and also contribute to some of the numbers that I'm about to describe, but in effect, I would suggest would mitigate some of the impacts related to the variances. So just in terms of each of the variances, I would like to just spend a moment on each. So in terms of the maximum building height, obviously from the intent of a bylaw perspective, the intent of the maximum building height for the dwelling is to limit potential impacts related to overlook, shadow, and loss of sky view on adjacent properties, as well as obviously maintain consistency in an area related to the physical character. So the maximum height on the property under the RL Suffolk zone is 9 meters, and the proposed building height is 9.3 meters. I would note that the prevailing character of surrounding neighborhood comprises a mix of obviously single and 2-story dwellings. There are a number of 2-story dwellings that are similar in nature to what is proposed this evening on the immediate street, including 197, 198, 205, 233, and 249 Forestwood Drive. All which reflect similar, I would say, proportions and are demonstrated through a variety of roof lines. The proposed height for the building exceeds obviously the bylaw by 0.3 meters. And in my opinion, the increase in height does not negatively impact the adjacent properties. I would note there's over a 10-meter setback of the dwelling to the adjacent property to the north, and obviously a compliant setback with the adjacent property to the south. In terms of the maximum ancillary building height, obviously the maximum height is 4 meters, and the proposed building height for the garage, which is located at the rear of the property, is 4.98 meters. I would note that the building for the detached garage, it was cited for a number of reasons in the rear, obviously to break up any potential impacts of massing of the dwelling, of the main dwelling, but also just in terms of its siting, there has been additional setbacks provided. So the bylaw does permit minimum setbacks for ancillary structures of 0.6 meters. I would note that in this case, there's a 0.8 meter setback from the adjacent property to the north. And then specifically from the property to the west, there's a 3.1 meter setback, which does 2 things. From my perspective, it does mitigate the impacts of the height. And then secondly, it provides for additional buffer to mitigate impacts on some of those border trees, as well as impacts from a sky view and landscaping perspective. In terms of the maximum lot coverage, obviously the maximum lot coverage is intended to assist in regulating the scale and massing of a building. The proposed increase in lot coverage, in my opinion, does not contribute negatively to the scale or massing of this specific proposed dwelling. I would note, just for the benefit of the committee, that the proposed building includes a side porch, a cabana porch, a porch off the den, as well as an entry portico, which accounts for a total of approximately 61.2 square meters. These covered features obviously contribute to the building coverage. They do not contribute to obviously the building area. And they're obviously single-story features that exist on the proposed dwelling. When you actually exclude those small covered features, the total lot coverage for just the actual footprint of the dwelling would be 316 square meters approximately. And I would note that the bylaw permits on this lot 361 square meters, which is well underneath the maximum permitted lot coverage. However, obviously these areas are necessary to ensure that the proposed dwelling meets the intent of several key design guidelines to obviously fit within the local context. And they also obviously contribute to the architectural character of the dwelling. Finally, in terms of the maximum floor area ratio, the intent of this provision obviously is similar to lot coverage, is to ensure that the mass and scale of the dwelling fits within the neighborhood context. I would suggest that some of the features that I mentioned as it relates to the portico, there's a number of built form features. Actually, if I could narrate the committee perhaps to maybe the next slide. Okay, thank you. So there's a number of features that mitigate in terms of the design of the dwelling. So this includes obviously a recessed building elements, which we'll show in further slides. And I would note that the massing is diminished as obviously a number of the building features have been broken up. There's a number of building components that do obviously break up the massing, both in terms of the coverage features, the various porticos, as well as the location of the garage, obviously in the rear of the property. Next slide, please. I would like to just take a moment. So this is the rear elevation of the building. Again, it's difficult sometimes to look at it just at the building elevation, but you can see that the building includes a number of single-story building elements, a variety of, for example, roof lines, and architectural elements which break up the massing. Next slide, please. And here are both the north and south side elevations for the building, which also further show some of the various building elements and variety of heights that are proposed as part of the dwelling. Next slide, please. So just for the benefit of the committee, I will note obviously that we've read the report from staff. We have no obviously concerns with the comments provided by staff, obviously recommending support of the variances. In my opinion, obviously the proposed application does meet the 4 tests under the Planning Act. And in my opinion, the proposed development does fit within the existing streetscape and context of the neighborhood. Further, I will note that there's been 3 letters of support as it relates to obviously the proposed development. We did note as well there was 3 letters submitted to the committee in opposition of the application and opposition to obviously various issues and concerns about sky views, tree impacts, etc. But just for the benefit of the committee, I'm obviously here to happy and answer any questions just to dive into any further nuance related to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Demchuk. Are there any questions or items of clarification? Go ahead, Ms. Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I have a question. It appears that
You're very low, the volume.
okay.
I don't know if it's just me. Yeah,
me
that's better.
better now.
Yeah.
It appears, Madam Chair, that there are balconies on the rear second floor. Are those Juliet balconies?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So those are either Juliet balconies or they are essentially just I'll call them faux balconies. It's more of an architectural element. They're not walkout balconies on the second floor, obviously not being permitted as part of the zoning bylaw.
Thank you.
Any other items of clarifications? I see none. Has anyone signed in to speak to this application, Ms. McRae?
Yes, I'll just move Ms. Anita Alexander into the meeting. Okay, I have her in the meeting now.
Go ahead, Ms. Alexander.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you put your camera on? Is it possible?
It should be on.
We still can't see you.
Not sure why, but should be on.
Is it okay just to talk?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, it's Ron Alexander, 219 Poplar Drive. We are on the lot to the west, basically directly behind this proposed development. I would say our biggest objection is to have a garage in the backyard. Right now, we have a very, very nice treed view out the back. And the last thing I want to see is a giant garage in the backyard. I don't think it's in fitting with the neighborhood at all. These are not 300-foot deep lots like down at the bottom of Chartwell, where this is a very common factor that people have been doing. So my biggest concern is just allowing a garage. The next thing will be granny suites, and everything else will be started once we start allowing people to build this kind of a structure. I always thought that auxiliary buildings in the backyard would be a small cabana or a tool shed, not a giant 2-car garage. There seems to be, I am looking at the house next door to me, which is under construction. They have a 4-car garage in the house across the street. They have a 3-car garage tandem. All the rest of the new builds all have their garages in the house itself. They're not basically plopped in the backyard. It seems to be a way of skirting around the bylaws by having this 5,000 square foot house plus the 2-car garage in the back classified as an auxiliary building. I'm sure it's probably allowed, but I completely 100% are opposed to having this. I understand why they want to do the height increases, but on the garage, again, here we want to increase the garage height
4.98 meters.
to 4.98 meters, which is again another great big huge thing that I'm going to be looking at every morning now when I wake up.
Instead of 4 meters.
Right now, there's a nice little small bungalow. I understand people are now going to 2-story buildings. I accept that, but I don't really want to have a garage in the backyard.
I'd like to speak as well, Anita Alexander. What I'm upset about as well, the garage variant says it should not be more than 4 meters, but it's 4.98 meters. Now, from what I'm reading and seeing, this is plus a cupola, meaning it will be even higher than that. I don't think that's necessary whatsoever. The house is already higher than it should be. Now the garage is higher than it should be. And it's extremely upsetting to us. And I don't understand how someone can build such a high accessory building, way higher than the allotted amount, plus a cupola over top of that. I am opposed to the height of the building personally, because that, like everything here is in meters, but people don't understand the height of the building is a whole foot higher than allowed. Let's talk in feet and inches. We are in Canada. We talk in meters as well, which is fine. So first of all, from what I understand, the allotted Building itself should be about 4,500 square feet, and it's about 5,000 square feet. So the building is bigger, the lot coverage is more than the bylaw, the heights are more. Like, why do we have bylaw when everyone gets away with, you know, these variances? And I must say too, there are other neighbors opposed to this, but they're on vacation. Great time to go to committee when half our neighbors are at their cottages or out of the country. Plus, anyway, we have never been this upset about something in our own neighborhood and have been here 33 years. So that's what you want to say something else, Ron?
Just to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you, committee.
Well, thank you for your submission. We appreciate you taking the time, and unfortunately, we don't have a say as to when an application comes to the committee. It's when it's filed and complete, they get their chance at the roster, and they're given the spot that's available. So it's unfortunate that some of the neighbors are not here to speak, but we do hear your concerns and will allow Mr. Demchuk to respond to them once we've heard from anyone else who's signed in to participate. Ms. McRae, is there anyone else waiting to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time.
Okay, very well. Are there any questions or items of clarification of Mr. Ron and Anita Alexander? If so, and then if not, I'll open for questions of Mr. Demchuk and let him speak to their concerns. I saw your hand go up, Ms. Murray.
I just had an additional question for our applicant.
For the applicant, okay. So Mr. Demchuk, go ahead. It's your chance to respond to the concerns of the neighbors, and then we'll take more questions from the members of the committee.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So through you, obviously, the neighboring property to the west, in terms of obviously a few comments I do have. In terms of the siting of the accessory structure, we've obviously cited it to be compliant with the zoning bylaw, both in terms of its size and setback. And in addition to that, we've located the accessory structure well in excess of some of those setbacks. So for example, there is a 0.6 meter minimum requirement in the zoning bylaw for a building such as this. What we've done specific to the neighboring property to the west, which is behind this the subject property, is provide a 3.1 meter setback from that property limit, which from my perspective obviously does two things primarily. It mitigates any potential impacts of that increase in height. And then secondly, there are some existing mature trees, border trees that exist along that property line. It allows for an appropriate setback and a sensitive setback to mitigate some of those potential impacts and not only keep the existing trees, but ideally, I know in speaking with my client, there's additional opportunities for tree planting, for improving landscaping features, for improving fences to further benefit the abutting property. I also heard comments as it relates to opposition of the height of the building, both in terms of the main dwelling height as well as the accessory structure, as well as concerns with the cupola feature. I will note that obviously the cupola features, there's a cupola being proposed on the main dwelling and a cupola that's being proposed on the accessory dwelling, just in terms of it's an architectural feature that my client would like to implement in the building design. They think it looks nice. I know I've spoken with my client, and they obviously want to make sure that the building is architecture articulated well, and making sure that cupola feature, although it does provide a little bit of a peak to the building, it obviously will be compliant with the requirements of the zoning bylaw. Those are my comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Murray, you had a question from Mr. Demchuk. Go ahead.
I do, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you. You indicated that it was indicated that the cupola would be in line with the zoning bylaws. However, it's not. There's a variance, right? So is the variance to the top of the roof? I've looked at the plan. So is the variance, just to be clear for the neighbors, the variance is to the top of the roof in the accessory structure, or the variance is to the top of the cupola?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, the variance is to the top of the roof of the accessory structure, not to the top of the cupola. So there are, I believe, permitted projections allowed in the zoning bylaw.
Okay. Further, go ahead, Ms. Murray.
Follow up, Madam Chair, through you to town staff. Is there provision in the zoning bylaw for that additional height on the house, as well as the cupola for the additional structure? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not a zoning examiner, so I'm not going to be interpreting the zoning bylaw at this time, but I can say that once the height is, whether it's varied or not, the maximum height will be to the top of the roof. And then there are provisions in the zoning bylaw to allow for any projections. And at the time of building permit, that projection would be reviewed and would need to comply with any permitted projections above the height that's being agreed to or approved today.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or items of clarification? Mr. Talowski, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up to that last question, and Catherine, maybe you can't answer it, but is it safe to assume that if, you know, the building is a meter higher, the cupola peak top is a meter higher, or regardless of the variance, is the cupola capped at a certain height?
Through Madam Chair, I can look it up exactly, but I think from my understanding of the zoning bylaw is that it would be from when you have a minor variance, you're varying the height that's permitted. So it would be you're varying the maximum height of that dwelling, the projection would be from that new height. So if you're trying to confirm whether the cupola would be measured from the revised height that's being agreed to today, potentially. If it's not approved, it would be from the maximum height within the zoning bylaw. Does that answer your question? So yes, it is
Yes,
high. It would be higher as long if you increase the height of the garage, the cupola goes up with it.
So if we're adding a meter to one, we're adding a meter to both.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Murray, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to our applicant. Is it not possible to lower the roof and to lower the roof line of the accessory building to comply, especially in light of the cupolas that are going to be added? Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I will note that in speaking to my client, they have obviously, you know, just as a quick preamble, in leading up to this application and, you know, over the course of recent days, they have been trying to, you know, door knock and meet with a number of neighbors, hear comments, including the neighbors we heard from this evening. I know in discussions with them, my clients are more than happy to remove the cupola from the building. The overall height of the accessory structure, it obviously works from two perspectives. The roof line is an appropriate proportion as it relates to obviously the main dwelling, and also it works with the truss design as it relates to obviously building the detached garage. But obviously, if the cupola is a concern, I know in speaking to them, they are more than happy to remove it.
Okay. Any further questions or items of clarification? All right, I see none. Let's take the matter into
Sorry,
committee.
the owner of the home has called in. I don't know their name, so I can't change but I mean, they are, if you see her there, Madam Chair, they're showing as owner of the house, and they're on the telephone icon, correct.
Okay. Mr. Demchak, what's the name of the owner? Mr. Demchak?
Oh, sorry. It's Travis and Rhiannon Hageman.
Okay, so I guess Ms. Rhiannon is on the phone. Do you hear us?
Is there she's, I apologize, technical difficulties. I think she's trying to connect. Oh, there it goes.
Yeah, now we can, yes.
Yeah, Travis Hageman speaking. So I just wanted to speak to a few of the items, especially the cupola on the garage. As Paul was mentioning earlier, we are going to remove that from the garage and not have that included in the submission. It will just be the 4.98 meters that we're asking for with no additional height on top. Yeah, it's after further discussion that we've had with the neighbors in the area. And it seems that it's just, at this point, we're willing to remove it from the project. There is no cupola on the main structure. It's only on the accessory structure. And then the other one item I wanted to speak to was the height of the main building. The reason for the 1 foot increase in height was to allow for a slope portion of the flat roof. As personally, I do not like putting roof drains in on a flat roof. I would like the water to fall off naturally. So we're asking for an increase in height of 1 foot to allow for that extra slope on the flat roof to ensure for adequate drainage instead of using drains.
Okay.
The other thing too is we just wanted to make it note that we took the time to pass out this information to the neighbors several weeks ago and spoke to quite a few in the neighborhood and provided our information of why we were doing things and what our reasonings were for what the reasons were for the variances.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Travis. We appreciate your submission, and the clarifications obviously make a difference in one. So are there any questions of Mr. Travis at this time from the committee members? Okay, I see none. Okay, we'll take the matter into committee and we will start the discussion. Who would like to start the ball rolling? So the plans right now include a cupola. Will those be removed from the plans, or?
Yes, the cupola will be removed from the plans and will not be constructed.
Okay.
For the benefit of the committee, perhaps if there is a recommendation, obviously pertaining to the accessory structure height, perhaps there's a note that that no cupola be included on the drawings.
Okay. I hope that helps with the thought process. Committee members, I'm in your hands. Ms. Murray, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, which I note that the staff is in support of the variances that have been requested. I've also taken into account the comments presented by the applicant this evening. I think it was a good presentation. I also deeply appreciate the owner of the house coming on to clarify some points and mitigate cupola. I also note that there was some oral objections noted this evening by neighbors, as well as other written objections that have been received. Also note that there were submissions that were supportive from some of the neighbors. It's my understanding that this accessory structure, which will be the garage, has been constructed so as to avoid removal of some of the trees, and that has influenced my decision. I'm satisfied that the minor variance application meets all four tests under the Planning Act, and I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the application for variance subject to the following conditions. The dwelling be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated May 2nd, 2022. and that the elevation drawings will exclude the cupola on the accessory structure, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if the building permit has not been issued for proposed construction. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Is there discussion on this recommendation? Mr. Talowski, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just thought I'd add the neighbors have some benefit of this thought process that's going on at the committee, or at least with this committee member. I appreciate that the applicant has removed the cupola. Yes, the garage is being requested to be a meter higher than it is allowed to be, but the garage is allowed to be in the backyard, and it is allowed to be a lot closer to the rear property line than it is. And I understand the concerns of the residents, but I'm satisfied in my mind that a sloped roof higher garage 3 meters from the back property line is going to have less of an impact than a lower garage that's just 0.6 meters from the property line.
Thank you, Mr. Chalowski. I agree with that. Are there any further comments or clarifications? Okay, I see none. Let's take the matter to a vote. All those in support? Okay. Your application has been approved, subject to the conditions stated, and none opposed. Thank you. Good night. Application CAV 114 of 2022 at 189 Watson Avenue. That is CAV 114 of 2022 at 189 Watson Avenue. I believe it's Ms. Medviva as the agent tonight. If there's anyone who is interested in speaking to this application, please call 815-6095 and staff will be standing by to take your call and provide you with further instructions to join the video conference. And we're looking at 189 Watson. Ms. Medviva, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening. So for the record, my name is Stephanie Matviva. I'm the registered agent for the property owner. My address would be 10 Kings Garden Circle in Mississauga. If I could have the next slide, please. The property we're looking at tonight is municipally known as 189 Watson Avenue. It's located on the east side of Watson Avenue, south of Palmer Avenue. It's located within an established residential neighborhood. I would note that the neighborhood has an eclectic character with a variety of dwelling sizes and architectural designs. Next slide, please. The owner is seeking permission to build a 2-story replacement dwelling. This requires 3 variances to be approved. One being an increase in maximum residential floor area, an increase to maximum lot coverage, as well as a reduced side yard setback. Next slide, please. So overall, the dwelling has been planned and designed to respect and reinforce the neighborhood. This is done through the careful attention to the placement of the dwelling on the lot, the architectural variation in the front facade, which we'll get to in a moment, as well as the scale of development. I'd like to highlight that the lot coverage variance, approximately 11.2 square meters, or nearly 2% of the requested lot coverage, is attributed to a covered front porch. Covered front porches are a fairly prevalent design feature in this area of this town. And, sorry, next slide, please. I'd also like to highlight that the proposed dwelling is actually a bit of an improvement over the existing conditions in that it is oriented a little bit further south than the existing dwelling on the property. Lastly, I'd like to highlight that the owner has received positive feedback from surrounding neighbors. There were 3 letters of support filed. And lastly, if I could add the last slide, please, or the next slide. The proposed front elevation has some architectural variations. It identifies the covered front porch there. It also identifies a varying roof line, which is very similar to other dwellings in the surrounding neighborhood. Now, just quickly, I'll walk through some of the other elevations. If I could have the next slide, please. The rear elevation also has some variation, again, to maintain consistency with the surrounding neighborhood and identify the scale and massing of the property. Next slide, please. These are just the side elevations. The lot itself does have a little bit of a difference in a grade. The dwelling has been designed to reflect that without being overly represent overdevelopment. Last slide, next slide, please. And then just in turn, this last slide that I wish to highlight, this is a rendering of the proposed dwelling. So it does show that there's a variation in materials, and it is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. I'm happy to answer, as outlined in our submission letter, it's my opinion that this application meets the 4 tests under the Planning Act. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mundviva. Are there any questions or items of clarification at this time? Okay, I see none. Ms. McCray, if there's no one who's called in to speak to this application, we can take the matter into committee.
There's no one at this time.
Very well. I'm ready for a motion. Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having undertaken my site visit, having reviewed the materials, including the written staff report, and having heard the presentation from the agent for the owner, I am satisfied that the requested variances conform to the 4 tests of the Act, and I'll put forward a motion of approval. Noting that there were no members of the public present with respect to this matter, I would make that motion subject to 2 standard conditions, and those conditions being that, that the dwelling be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings submitted with the application on May 6, 2022, and that the approval expired within 2 years of the date of the decision if a building permit's not been issued.
Very well, thank you. Mr. Hardcastle, is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved, none opposed. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
CAV 115 of 2022 at 2432 to 2452 Lakeshore Road West and 77 to 99 Bronte Road. Again, this is application CAV 115 of 2022. Who do we have here tonight? Ms. Robinson.
Good evening, Madam Chair. So my name is Brianne Robinson. I'm a planner with Weston Consulting, located at 201 Millway Avenue in the city of Vaughan. I am acting this evening as the planning agent for the owner of the subject property. The property is located on the northeast corner of the Bronte Road and Lakeshore Road West intersection. The proposed application contemplates the development of a 6-story mixed-use building. The subject property is also currently subject to a site plan application. The application is currently under review with staff, and we're working with the reviewing departments and agencies to address any outstanding comments on the application. So the minor variances presented to you this evening are related to zoning non-compliances that were identified through review of our site plan application with staff. Just as some background information, the property is located at a gateway location for the Bronte Village growth area. The Livable Oakville official plan designates the subject property as Main Street 2, which permits mixed-use development up to 6 stories in height, which also includes a wide range of retail and service commercial uses that are permitted with residential uses above. The intent of this land use designation is to allow for a mix of residential, commercial, and office uses to develop high quality design standards and appropriately scaled pedestrian environments for the Bronte Village Gateway. The subject lands are also zoned Main Street 2 under the zoning bylaw, which permits uses and heights that are consistent with the official plan. So the variance application tonight requests 3 variances. The first variance is in relation to balconies, requesting that balconies are permitted to be located in the flankage yard. For this property, the flankage yard is designated as the yard abutting Lakeshore Road West. Currently, balconies are only permitted to be located in the front, which would be Bronte, or the rear, which would be the eastern property line. So we're looking to have the balconies permitted within the flankage yard on Lakeshore Road West. The next variance is with regards to balcony projection. So the zoning bylaw permits a projection of 1.5 meters, and we're requesting a maximum projection of 3.6 meters. It's noted that the projection of that depth is only for a selected location for the proposal, specifically located at an interior corner facing an interior courtyard of the proposed development. The majority of the balconies proposed have projections of 1.3 meters to 2.1 meters. And this would act as an extension of the living space for residents and provide usable private outdoor space from their units. The final variance that we're requesting is to permit ancillary residential uses of the 4th story to occupy a maximum of 17% of the length of the main wall oriented towards the front lot line. So in this case, it would be Bronte Road, when a maximum of 15% is permitted in this case. The residential entrance for the proposed development is proposed off of Bronte Road in order to facilitate continuous commercial uses along Lakeshore Road West. So in order to provide adequate and safe residential access to the building, we require an increase in the permitted percentage, while also providing an ample lobby space to meet the needs of the future residents. And this also makes an effort to maximize the retail uses that abut the streets, and ensuring that there's a primary use that's publicly accessible for this area. So in conclusion, I've had an opportunity to review the staff report and have no questions or concerns regarding the conditions of approval. I do recognize that there was one letter of objection in terms of privacy and market value, I believe. So I'm happy to answer any questions of the public or members of committee. And it's my opinion that the requested variances meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act and represent good planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Are there any questions or items of clarification of Ms. Robinson? Mr. Talowski, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the applicant, just with respect to that letter of objection, where it raises privacy, overlook, and the balconies as areas of concern, just so I make sure I understood your presentation, and if the resident is viewing tonight, they do as well. If I understood your presentation, so there is no height variance, so there's no issue that you're looking for the committee to approve with respect to increasing what's permitted in terms of the height of the building or the setbacks of the building. I believe you also indicated that the variance for the balconies is flankage yard, which is lakeshore. So the balconies facing Brownie Road, where the resident Road Inn lives, those balconies are permitted as of right. And also that the increased depth of the balcony that you're asking for, it doesn't involve the balconies that are facing Brownie Road?
So yes, through you, Madam Chair, you're correct, member. What we are looking to do is it is an exception where that one large depth is for the proposed projection. The balconies are permitted within Bronte Road, as that's the front yard, so they are permitted there currently. Some of the balconies on Bronte Road do project further than the 1.5 meters currently permitted, but it's not to the extent of the requested 3.6 meters. It's more so within the 1.3 meter to 2.1 meter range.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Any further items of clarifications or questions? Okay, I see none. Ms. McCrea, is there anyone called in with interest to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time.
Okay, very well. We'll take the matter into committee. Go ahead, Mr. Talowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm going to move that this application be approved as applied for, finding that it meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act. I do not believe the variances being requested are going to have an impact. As earlier discussed, there is the 1 letter opposition. Through the presentation, Madam Chair, I'm satisfied that the concerns raised by the resident are not related to the variances, that the concerns being raised are in relation to as of right permissions. Madam Chair, I would make that approval subject to the development being constructed in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, and that the variance expires within 2 years if a permit is not issued.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Talowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Okay, I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application is approved, none opposed. Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
Madam Chair, members of committee. Have a good evening.
You too. Item 116 of 2022 at 1503 Durham Street. Again, it's 116 of 2022 at 1503 Durham Street. I have Mr. David Nelson listed as the agent. Is Mr. Nelson with us this evening?
Yeah, it'll take, there's 2 of them there, so I've moved one in and now, okay, so just bear with me a moment. Okay, he should be there now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. David Nelson, on behalf of the owner of the property. For the record, my address is 382 Bartos Drive, Oakville, Ontario, L6K 3E6. My phone number is 905-580-9431. Variances pertain to two existing conditions as I will relate them to you, Madam Chair. You can see the dark little piece at the corner of the existing garage. They want to extend that over to increase the width of the garage. So again, we need to have the existing projection of the garage approved. The second variance pertains to the easterly, I will call it northerly, sorry, wall of the garage. The variance is at the extreme lower corner, closest to the street. Again, we are building on top of that wall, so we need the variance in order to achieve that. Next slide, please. This is a slide showing the kitchen area. The area of concern expressed in the staff report relates to the floor above this. I just wanted to show you this so you get some perspective of what's going on. Next slide, please. The area of concern noted in the staff report, and I do note that the staff did support both of the variances, but there was a concern about the possibility of a balcony. And so we have added the note there, no access to the flat roof. That is a new 4-bay casement window, opens outwards. It has screens on the inside. The window is approximately a foot above the floor. So by definition, a balcony must be accessed from the floor to which it is attached. There is no access here. That concludes my presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Are there any questions of Mr. Nelson at this time? Okay, I see none. Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anyone called in with interest to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time.
Okay, we'll take the matter into committee. Who would like to move a motion? Go ahead, Ms. Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having conducted my site visit and reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town staff's written report, which I note that the town staff is in support of, also having taken into account the clarification with regards to the concern of a potential balcony, of which that has been clarified by the applicant this evening. I note that there are no written or oral objections, and there is no one from the public to speak in support of this either. I am satisfied that the minor variance application meets all 4 tests under the Planning Act, and I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the application for the variance subject to the following conditions: that the dwelling be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan dated May 19th, 2022, and elevation drawings dated March 2022, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Okay, I see none. All those in support? All those opposed? None opposed. Your application has been approved. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Have a good evening.
You too, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're looking at application CEV 117 of 2022 at 262 King Street. Again, it's CEV 117 of 2022 at 262 King Street. Who are the agents on this application? Clive Maley and Jennifer Frivolti.
I've moved Mr. Mail into the meeting.
Okay, very well. Mr. Maley. You're muted. Can you please unmute yourself? If you're able to speak and turn your camera on. Ms. McRae, do you have any contact with the applicant in a way to let them know that their turn has come?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes,
Are you able to turn your camera on?
Start video. Okay.
Very well, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's my first time using Zoom. So,
Not at all, not at all. Go ahead, sir.
okay. So I'm the owner of 262
King Street.
King Street. Yes, sorry, I'm just putting my notes here. And I've applied for having an elevator on the side of the house. I thought it would be a good place to put it for two reasons. One, it's not right at the front of the house when everyone's, or close to anyone, apart from my one neighbor, but he doesn't have a window that views it. So it doesn't obstruct him from seeing the lake and looking that direction. But the main reason is I had an architect work with me on it. And as people have said, that the house has been completely renovated before I bought it. It's in a beautiful condition, 10 years ago. And the only way we could access it without tearing the whole of the upstairs about and part of the downstairs would be to put it in that corner, because there's on the main floor, there's a sitting room, and right above it, there's another sitting room. So you'd be going from one large space to another large space. If, like some of the neighbors have suggested, that we do it on the west side of the building and going through the garage, you'd be tearing a bathroom out, or you'd be ruining a bedroom, which would, by the time you put an elevator in there. And the other thing they were saying, that if you went down into the garage, well, I've never heard of something that's, you know, not practical like that. There's a suggestion. So what they're saying, if we were first lost a bathroom upstairs and had to change the size of the bedroom as well, that you'd go down into the garage, and then you'd have to ask someone to move the two cars and dress warm when you're in your wheelchair, so you can go through the garage in the winter and then back into the house, the other side of the garage. Just not practical. And as I said, I've had an expert architect look at it, and he's had a lot of experience with handicap access. And he said this is the only sensible place to put it. Now, there's some other concerns from my neighbor on my east side. That's, and his concerns were that it would be noisy. Well, it's not a noisy elevator. It's not one with a big motor at the top. It's hydraulic, and the hydraulic motor would be in my basement. And it would be a lot quieter than the air conditioner that he's got on his building. Not complaining about it, never have, but that would be a lot noisier than the elevator. The elevator is inside this structure. There's no gaps there or vents or anything to let the noise out. And the other thing he was concerned about was the free running of the water. Well, I don't see how you wouldn't. We don't have a river going down there. So even when I've built it, there's plenty of room for the water to go. And if he's concerned about streams underneath, when we do the footings for the elevator, obviously when you do your footings, you backfill them with all gravel, clear stone. So that would allow any of the streams or any of the little running of the water to keep continuing on the way it would go. And I think that's all I can say, really. Those are the only concerns that he came up with. There was some for heritage, but I don't know if this is the right time to discuss those or not.
Well, you will be subject to a heritage approval, of course. So
that's right. Yes,
that's a different process altogether, and it's independent of this committee's purview. if you're satisfied with your presentation, I'll open to the panel for questions.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions from members of the committee to Mr. Mele? Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's just a silent T at the end, just Mayo.
Oh,
No
Mayo.
problem.
Okay.
I'm used
All
to
right.
it, don't worry.
It sounds Italian to me. That's why I'm trying to
Right.
enunciate it. Ms. Murray, go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry, apologies, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Through you, just to be clear, if I understand the drawings correctly, the elevator is on a side for which it faces the neighbors, and there are no windows on that side of the house. Is that correct?
There is a small window. We're not right by the elevator.
Thank you.
Any further questions or items of clarification? Ms. McRae, has anyone called in to speak to this application? Well, I do recognize that we do have some letters of opposition as well as letters of support from the neighbors. So those have all been accounted for in record.
There's no one at this time.
Very well. Mr. Mail, thank you for addressing the concerns that were found in the emails of opposition that we received. We appreciate your feedback on that and explanations. Mr. Flemington, I see you getting ready for a motion. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Madam
So,
Chair.
So if there's nothing
Thank-
further, no items of clarification, we will take the matter into committee, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Flemington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having done my site visit as well as reviewed the application submitted, also noting that the town's written staff report is in support of the application. I also want to thank the applicant for its comments, noting some of the opposition that was presented. There were 6 emails of opposition for this application. In writing, there were no oral objections in tonight's meeting. I would also like to note that there were also 6 letters in support of this application in writing. And I want to find that this application be supported, move a motion that it be supported as applied for, finding that it does meet the intent of the bylaws and the Planning Act, and I do find that it is minor in nature. I'd like to include the 2 following conditions, that the addition for the barrier-free elevator be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings submitted with the application on June 3rd, 2022. And I would also like to include the standard condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
Thank you, Mr. Flemington. Is there a discussion on these recommendations? Okay, I see none. All those in support? The application has been approved, none opposed. Thank you, Mr. Mail. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Yes.
We are moving on to application CAV 119 of 2022 at 32 Ennis Clare Drive West. Again, it's CAV 119 of 2022 at 32 Ennis Clare Drive West. I believe it's Mr. Hicks who's back with us.
Yes, it is.
Good evening, Mr. Hicks. Go
Thank you,
ahead.
Madam Chair. William Hicks, Hicks Design Studio here in Oakville on Robinson Street 295. We've been before you before on this application, 32 Ennis Clare Drive West. We actually have a permit for what's shown on the drawing right now. The difference that we are seeking today is that we would like to enclose, or not to enclose, but to finish some additional space on top of the garage. And if we can go to the second floor plan, but I just want to reiterate on that one drawing that what we have a permit for and what we're asking for right now on that elevation, which we'll come back to at the end, are exactly the same. So there will be no changes on the exterior of the house. So this drawing shows in the pink tone the original application. If you know, in the housekeeping bylaw, we have to cover at least 25% of the garage space to comply, or else we have to count the entire area of the garage. So as a second area or square footage. So what's shaded in gray, the owner's has got a permit, he's under construction. And what he basically looked at was to say, well, you know, if there's no change to the outside of the building and all I'm doing is finishing those spaces within the garage, what possible concerns would there be? And I said that planning I knew would not support it, and I know planning's not supporting it tonight, and I will agree to disagree with Catherine. But if we go back to the elevation, I think that, or to the rendering at the beginning, I think what I would say in justification is that there was 3 or 4 points in the infill control bylaw that we needed to comply to. If there was a house that's a poster child for the infill control bylaw, this is it. This is exactly what the infill control bylaw was trying to get built within established residential neighborhoods. So we've taken care to lower roof lines on the garage side, to step them, to use dormers that lower the impact in terms of mass and scale. And I know it's a bit of an unusual request, but it's come from the clients. I supported it because it has no impact on the neighbors. In fact, the 4 neighbors that immediately surround the application have fully supported it as they did on the original one. And while I know it exceeds the allowable gross floor area up to that 35+% versus the 29% allowable, in my mind, it has really absolutely no impact in terms of scale, massing, character, impact on adjacent neighbors. It's additional square footage that's infilled within the roof. And I think because of that, I believe it still complies to all the 4 tests. It might be deemed, and planning seems to have deemed, that it's maybe asking for a little bit too much. But if I changed anything on the exterior of the building, I might tend to agree that if I changed the mass and added a 2nd-story mass to that side of the building, I might be more inclined to agree with Catherine. But in this case, as I say, I agree to disagree. And I think this is a spectacular house. The neighbors love this house. The residents are looking forward to it being built. And I'm going to ask the committee to consider my application tonight that this really does meet those tests, and it certainly complies with all of the components of the infill control bylaw, which I have to deal with every day of my life. And I can't imagine there's one here that it doesn't comply with, other than the percentage has gone from 29 to 35%. So with that, I'll leave it open for suggestions. I don't believe there's any neighbors speaking in opposition to it. As I say, they're all very happy to it, to have seen this house get underway finally, because that lot has sat for a long time waiting for construction to occur. So with that, I'm open to questions, Madam Chair and members of the committee. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hicks. Are there questions or items of clarification at this time? Okay, I see none. Has anyone called in with interest to speak to this application, Ms. McRae?
There's no one at this time.
Okay, we'll get the ball rolling and have a discussion. Oh, Ms. Murray.
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Oh, you did. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
But I wasn't quick enough. Sorry.
Yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair, to town staff, there seems to be a concern. I'd like to get to the root of the concern, other than that staff wouldn't have supported the previous application if it had resulted in an increased residential floor area ratio presented now. I'm wondering, I'd like to give maybe town staff the opportunity to elaborate or add to this comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to this application. I think whenever we're reviewing an application, we always bring us back to the 4 tests, the minor variance, and one of the tests as part of that is minor, and that's both qualitative and quantitative. And in the situation, it was presented originally in the application that space wasn't usable, and that's how it was interpreted. Now coming back later, that space is now considered usable, and it's still, when looking at this application as a whole, we're under the opinion that it doesn't meet that test of minor. And whether there's a building permit or not at this point, I think it needs to be evaluated as an application as a whole, and whether that'd be appropriate. If you have further questions, I'm happy to respond.
Okay, thank you, Bookerfield. Any other questions or items of clarification? Okay, let's take the matter into committee. Who would like to get the ball starting? Mr. Tulowski, do you want to take the chair and I'll give it a go and I'll start? Put everyone out of there.
I can start if you'd like.
Certainly, Madam Chair, happy to take the chair.
Okay. Mr. Hicks, you're a veteran at this, so I'm not even going to, presume that this is something that was meant to happen. We certainly don't like it when applicants apply for something and come back later and just tack on a little bit more and stretch it a little bit more. And I had to say that. But seeing the rendering of this building and seeing your thought process in looking at it, and I see the breakdown in the roofing, and it's not a full 2-story home that is going to be gigantic and very prominent in the neighborhood. So I'm inclined to make a motion to approve this. I just wanted to err on the side of caution that it's not in the best interest of how this committee operates, and for people to come back after they've already received variances for their homes to kind of ask for more. And I respect Ms. Buckerfield's approach to this. Like, if we had looked at this in the first onset, would we have said that this is an acceptable format? I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the application right from the get-go. But as it stands right now in its built form and with evidence that's presented before us, I'm inclined to move a motion to approve it. And I could be way off base, and it's really up to the rest of the committee to weigh in on it. But that's my feeling. So if I did, I would move a motion to approve, subject to the standard conditions that the built form be in accordance with the plans as submitted, and to the satisfaction of the director of the planning Department of Planning Services, and that the expiry would be within 2 years if a building permit has not been issued or a construction completed. I guess that's my take on this application.
Sorry, I just need clarification. So the condition you've said, plans as submitted and the Director of Planning Services, it's both?
Well, Ms. Buckerfield, what would your preference be, to just leave it as the Director of Planning? Because the plans have been submitted and nothing is changing except for the allowance of the space above the garage to be filled, correct?
I believe that the plans appear to be dated May 11th, 2022. Is that correct, Mr. Hicks?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
So it may make sense to do that. And I also wanted to clarify that second condition, you I may have misspoke and said that the construction be completed within 2 years. I think it's that it be started.
Right.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Just for the interest. Yeah.
Proposed construction. Yes.
And so we're just going to use the term plans, or are we going to have elevations and site plan, or just the term plans dated May 11th, 2022?
We're happy to include all of them, so.
So elevations and plans of May 11th, 2022.
Yep.
So elevation and site plan? Or you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So elevation and site plans dated May 11th, 2022.
Correct.
Thank you.
So now it's up to the chair to take it from there.
Thank you, Ms. McHale. Any discussion on that motion?
Mr. Flemington.
Mr. Flemington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the motion. So I just, with regards to my members' comments, I agree wholeheartedly with the comments with regards to when an applicant makes an application and then later on comes back and makes a change. I think that in reviewing the first application, I did not review it in the sense that in the event that this was part of it, would it be, approved or not? Because that's not what we were looking at that time. I think that, what I'm reviewing right now, as well as noting that there were no written objections to this application, and that there was no oral objections to this application. Noting the presentation this evening, I'll take the word of the applicant's agent that, there were discussions had with the neighbors and that they are looking forward to this being built as illustrated. I can't see what is being proposed from the drawings having a negative impact on any of the neighbors in the neighborhood. Noting that how the premises is being built and how the massing has been taken into account, I see that as okay. So with regards to it being minor, for those reasons, I do think that it is minor. As a result of it not having the negative impact on the neighbors, and that I think that the massing of the building has been dealt with. So I am in support of the motion. And yeah, just relaying in the future though, had the applicant expressed that, I would hope that any agents bring that forth as a whole. Because that's what we're here for, is to review all of the variances needed. And I think speaking personally, it's not in favor of this as far as them doing one thing and then coming back and applying for something else. So I just want that on record. So I am in support of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Flemington. Any other discussion on the motion? Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep my comments brief. I think that some of the comments that were articulated by Mr. Hicks particularly resonated with me. In particular, no physical changes to the building, and some of the other comments of the committee members with respect to no impact on adjacent property, on adjacent properties, particularly resonated with me. But what I will sort of spend a moment to highlight is this identifies a challenge with respect to the way that the RFA is calculated under this bylaw. It allows for this kind of thing to occur, where you have no physical change to the building, but an increase in floor area. And I'd just like to go on the record and speaking to that. I will be supporting the motion here in front. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I see none. I will just add my comments on this. Not happy when things like this happen either. It presents the committee with a difficult decision, because when you look at the variance being requested tonight, do I believe there'll be an impact from the variance tonight? No. However, I think staff does make a compelling case as well, that had you bundled 1,000 square feet plus an extra depth plus lot coverage, would I have voted in favor of that? I'm not sure I would have. Having said that, the motion is to approve the application. All those in favor? Sorry, I can't see everybody on the screen. Okay, I'm going to take the contrary view, but your application is approved 4-1.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. So.
Okay, I'll happy to pass back the chair now.
Thank you, Mr. Tulowski.
I just want to confirm, Michael, that you were opposed to that motion?
That's right.
Thank you. So just bear with me a moment while I move Ian and Michael out of the meeting for the next item, and I'll let you know when that's completed. Okay, they've been removed from the meeting.
Okay, we're looking at application CAV 120 of 2022 at 3518 Wycroft Road. Again, it's CAV 120 of 2022 at 3518 Wycroft Road. I have Mr. David Fay as the agent. Is Mr. Fay in attendance?
Yes, he is. I don't know, maybe there's a problem with his, oh, he should be there now. Yes, he's in the meeting.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Mr. Fay.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is David Fay. My address is 338 Lakeshore Road East, PO Box 52147, Oakville, Ontario. I'm here this evening on behalf of Melrose Investments, Inc., which is the applicant with respect to minor variance application CAVA 120/2022. The property in question with respect to our minor variance application is located at 3518 Wycroft Road This is known legally as Block 6 on Plan 20M1005. And could I ask that Plan 1005 be put up on the screen? Thank you. I just want to point out the location of Block 6 within the larger context. This plan is the registered subdivision plan for the Riocan Power Center at Burloak Drive and Wycroft Road. On the drawing, you can see through the middle of the plan the Wycroft Road extension from Burloak Drive easterly. To the north of Wycroft Road is the Burloak Power Center, Block 2 and Block 24. 24 is the Home Depot location. And to the south of Wycroft Road, to the east of the Sheldon Creek Open Space Valley, which is Block 15, and immediately north of Block 12, which is a stormwater management facility, you will see Block 6. So Block 6 is on the south side of Wycroft Road, and it abuts the Sheldon Creek Valley to the west, and it abuts the stormwater management facility to the south, beyond which is the Canadian National Railway line. Could I have the site plan put back up on the screen? Thank you. So the Block 6 proposed industrial building shows on the site plan with car parking in front on the south side of Wycroft Road. To the west is the Sheldon Creek Valley. To the south is the stormwater management pond. The building is approximately 46,000 square feet, and it is zoned E3 industrial, the property, and that zoning permits outside storage. And you can see on the site plan sketch, outside storage is proposed along the westerly side and southerly portion of the industrial building. And hence, the reason for our minor variance application this evening, the zoning bylaw 2014-014, table 4, 11.2, row 7, requires that there be a minimum width of landscaping along any interior side lot line and rear lot line of 7.5 meters in width where the use is outside storage. So in this particular case, there needs to be, according to the zoning bylaw, a 7.5 meter landscaping strip along the Sheldon Creek Valley block and a 7.5 meter strip along the rear lot line abutting the stormwater management pond. The 7.5 meter requirement is obviously intended to mitigate any outside storage impacts on adjacent land uses. And in this particular case, the adjacent land uses, in our opinion, would not require such extensive mitigation protection. The Sheldon Creek Valley is well treed, and there will be additional trees required within the landscaping width along the interior side lot line. Similarly, the stormwater management pond to the south is well vegetated and it does not require, in our opinion, the 7.5 meters requested in the bylaw. And given that the impacts on these two blocks would be minimal, we have proposed that the side lot line have a minimum landscape width of 6.5 meters as opposed to the 7.5 meters. And the rear lot line have a minimum landscaping width of 3.5 meters instead of the 7.5 meters. We note that the staff recommendation on this application is in support and that it meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act, and we agree. We believe the proposal provides for additional use of valuable industrial land. This site is being zone E3 employment, and permitting outdoor storage is obviously intended to provide the outside storage opportunity for the future tenant. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, we are requesting relief from the provisions of the zoning bylaw as proposed. We believe our application meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act. Excuse me, I'm being bothered by a fly here, pardon me. And the proposed landscaping widths are appropriate for this particular situation. We agree with the 2 staff recommendations with respect to conditions and would ask that you approve this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fay. Are there any questions or items of clarifications of the applicant at this time? Okay, I see none. Ms. McCray, has anyone called in to speak to this application?
There's no one at this time.
Okay, very well. We'll take the matter into committee. Who would like to move a motion? Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having undertaken my site visit, having reviewed the materials and the written staff report, and having heard the applicant's presentation, I am satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the 4 tests of the Act, and I'll put forward a motion of approval, noting that the reduction in the landscape setback will not have a negative impact upon adjacent properties, including the adjacent valley feature. So the motion will be subject to 2 conditions, those being that the development be constructed in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services, and that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a permit has not been issued for the proposed construction. I would note that there were no members of the public present with respect to this matter, and no letters received with respect to this matter.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there discussion on this recommendation? Okay, I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved, none opposed.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Okay, the last item on our agenda this evening is application CV 094 for 2022 at 469, 499, and 529 and 549 Great Lakes Boulevard. Again, it's application CV 094 of 2022 at 469, 499, 529, 549 Great Lakes Boulevard. And this was deferred from June 14th of 2022.
Can you, Madam Chair, can you please ask, there's 3 people, I don't know whether they're all joining, if they could raise their hand if they're wanting to join the meeting so I know who to move in. Okay, perfect, thank you.
I have Miss Dana Anderson as listed as the agent. If there's anyone else who's in attendance, please raise your hand and you will be invited to speak. We are at CEV 094 of 2022 for 469, 499, 529, and 549 bundled together for Great Lakes Boulevard. Good evening, Ms. Anderson.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for your patience this evening. My name is Dana Anderson. I'm a partner and planner with MHBC Planning. And as you indicated, I'm here on behalf of Fengate or Michigan 2 Nominee Inc. for the variance application at 469 through to 549 Great Lakes Boulevard. As you also noted, this application was deferred from the last meeting. And that was based on notice signs being removed at some point without our knowledge. I can assure you for this hearing, we've ensured that the signs have been posted for the full extent of the notice period and have remained in place. And I've actually done the diligence of having photos taken every day to ensure they are there. So hopefully that was not a repeated issue. If I could have the next slide, please. Very briefly, this application pertains to a large site that is located within the Great Lakes Area Business Park. It's just under 11 hectares in area. This site, as you can see, has a unique orientation. It has frontage along Great Lakes, as well as a long curved flankage along Michigan Drive as it curves into the internal parts of the industrial park. The next slide, please. So this application is currently the subject of a site plan with the town that is very close to approval. In fact, this variance is one of the last remaining conditions to be met. The site plan, as you can see, provides for 4 industrial buildings of various sizes. The next slide, please. The site is designated business employment and also zoned business employment E2 with special provision 355. And the proposed site plan and development is in full compliance with the zoning provisions, but does require 1 minor variance. If I can have the next slide, please. So that variance is unique to the site as it relates to loading areas. So the bylaw has a provision that does not permit loading between the main wall of the building and a flankage yard. And due to this lot's configuration, you can see that the flankage yard is in essence sort of the continuation along the curve until you get to that sort of far portion where you can see the parking area. And so as a result, we have a request for a variance to allow the loading areas between the main wall closest to that flankage yard and the lot line. And we are seeking a minor variance to permit that condition. If I can have the next slide, please. I would note that in terms of addressing any impacts related to that flankage yard and the loading areas, there is extensive landscaping, additional vegetation, including a number of additional trees. And you can see the various sections that are provided here that are being provided in accordance with the site plan to address any impacts. And so, Madam Chair, I have provided a planning justification with our application that reviewed the 4 tests. It's my opinion that based on this unique condition, we meet those 4 tests. I have also read the staff report and the comments, which are all in support of the application and also the recommendations for the 2 conditions. And we are in agreement with staff's comments and the conditions on the applications. And with that, I'd be pleased to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Very well, thank you for your submission. Are there any questions of Ms. Anderson at this time? If there's anyone still in the panel that would like to speak to this application, please raise your hand and you'll be invited to speak by the Secretary Treasurer.
Yes, there's someone. Yes, I'm just moving them into the meeting.
I know Mr. Girolami from Fengate, I believe, was in attendance and may have been one of those individuals, but I'm not sure.
Yes, that's who it is, and I'm trying to move them in. So I don't know if there's an issue with their system or no. The hand's down now, so perhaps everything's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is it safe to move the matter to committee
yes.
if no one has any questions of Ms. Anderson? Okay, let's do that. Who would like to move a motion? Did we lose Mr. Flemington? I don't see him.
He was moved into the meeting with Mr. Tulowski. I saw him there, so I guess he's no longer in the meeting.
Okay. I saw Mr. Hardcastle's hand go up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having undertaken my site visit, having reviewed the materials, including the written staff report, as well as having heard the presentation of the agent, I am satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the 4 tests of the Act.
We lost your.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I got a message saying I was muted by the host. We'll try that again.
Yes.
Having undertaken my site visit, reviewed the materials, I am satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the 4 tests of the Act. And I'll put forward a motion of approval, noting that there is extensive landscape treatment and efforts to orient the loading in such a way as to mitigate any impacts associated with the flankage condition. The approval would be subject to 2 conditions, those being that the building be built in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services, and that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision. If a
building permit
Thank you. Oh,
has not been issued, or the proposed construction.
thank you.
We got you. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Okay, I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved, none opposed, and I note that Mr. Flemington is not with us.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee and staff.
Good night. Okay, we have minutes to confirm for the July 5th meeting. Ms. Murray, thank you for confirming them. And then motion to adjourn. Mr. Hardcastle, thank you. We are adjourned at 8:57.